Kanye West needed a little over 7,100 signatures from registered voters in the Mountain State. He submitted 15,000 signatures, but only 6,383 were confirmed state registered voters.
Important update as we begin this important episode. A couple weeks ago, we informed our listeners with the best and most accurate information we had at the time that one Kanye West, the famous rap artist, was qualified to be on the presidential ballot under the birthday party in West Virginia. Important update, he no longer is. So he collected 15,000 signatures, and apparently more than 13,800 of them were legible, so that's great. But it looks as though over, I think, 8,000 of them were not registered voters in West Virginia. Something like 8,000. Anyway, I just didn't want to be purveyors of fake news here at Appodlachia, and we talked about it in a previous episode. Had to get that out of the way. The more important news story of the day, John. And this is a callback, too, from another episode, another several episodes. Our good friend, and as we have established, friend of the pod, Jerry Falwell Jr. He's back in the news again, Big John, isn't he?
I'm so excited. This has been my favorite topic throughout this entire day.
Me too. You know, you gotta find these little nuggets of happiness during coronavirus. It's a very stressful time, very difficult, a lot of people going through things, and whenever I get a push notification on my phone from a news company, be it the New York Times or whoever, and I see the words Jerry Falwell Jr., my heart just lights up. Why don't you tell the world what kind of wild hijinks and shenanigans our friend Jerry is getting into?
Well, it happened, Chuck. It finally happened. We have a headline that we didn't have to write. Everybody now, I think, will agree that Jerry Falwell is a douche. But here, I guess, is why. Jerry Falwell, it's come out that Jerry Falwell likes to watch his wife have sex with another guy. I mean, which
Nothing,
we're not,
no kink shaming, no kink shaming on this show.
You do you. If it's consensual and all that mumbo jumbo, that's fine. That's not why we think he's a douchebag.
That's right.
We think he's a douchebag because he's a giant hypocrite, but I'm sure we'll talk about that in a second. But let me start at the beginning. Jerry Falwell and his wife, is it Becky?
It is Becky, yes.
Yeah, Becky. They hire a pool entrepreneur
yes, that's right.
To make sure that their pool is taken care of. A couple months into it, according to the pool entrepreneur, he begins having a relationship with Becky Falwell.
Yeah, okay, so we've got the pool entrepreneur, and we've got Jerry Falwell Jr.'s wife, Becky. They're in a relationship of sexual nature.
Right.
Okay.
So
JFJ knows this.
Right, and he knows this this is according to the pool entrepreneur. Jerry Falwell is denying these allegations. The only allegation that he has said is true is that he threw his wife under the bus.
Of course he did.
Said,
that son of a bitch. Of course he did.
He literally said, "Oh, by the way, my wife did have an affair, and I've forgiven her, but I didn't do what Big John's about to say I did, and that is watch his wife have sex with another man from the corner, according to the pool entrepreneur."
A very important detail being the corner. Yeah, again, not my thing. Would not be interested in doing that. Not kink shaming. However, Jerry Falwell Jr. is the ultimate sexual shamer because the students at his university are basically not even allowed to touch each other's pinkies.
Yeah, I mean,
we've talked about that. We had a game about it even.
Yeah, that's true. That was a good game. Turns out Jerry Falwell Jr.'s probably broken every honor code that we had a game about.
Right, seriously.
So I mean, now this guy has turned into a business partner of Jerry's.
The pool
He's no longer
entrepreneur.
right. He's no longer a pool entrepreneur. He is now a business partner. He has a share of a. He now owns like shares in a youth hostel with Jerry Falwell. The whole story wraps around with the pool entrepreneur wanted out of the business agreement. Jerry wasn't going to let him. He believed that he was extorting him. Jerry Falwell Jr. comes out and says that his wife had an affair and he's forgiven her. And then this guy's like, wait a second, you didn't forgive her because you enjoyed watching, and here's the proof. So like, if you go read the article, it literally lists a bunch of, he had text messages. He had a video of,
Didn't he have text messages?
Allegedly of Becky, which Reuters did say this is true, of Becky naked talking to him on video, and Jerry Falwell Jr. peeking around the corner. I mean, it's blatant that this guy has more evidence than Jerry Falwell Jr. Jerry Falwell Jr. obviously has way more power than this guy, so it'll be interesting in terms of that dynamic. But I do think you're going to see the fall of Jerry Falwell. And then Trump will help him get back to
I was going to ask, I mean, this has to be a fast track for getting on the speaker list at the RNC, right?
Yeah, I think he just flew in. So, yeah, Jerry Falwell Jr. It was a good run, man. It really was, because total douchebag, and just continued to be a douchebag. But yeah, exactly. I mean, he's the George Bush of evangelicals. My God.
Anyway, enough with this intro. Got it there. Jerry Falwell Jr. He'll be back. And we'll be here. Ready to tell you all the things that he's doing. Before we get to our interview, wanted to do a quick plug. We recently launched our YouTube channel. We're going to have more video up there of the shows, video of us on the shows. I don't get it. People apparently like that. I don't know why, but if you want to see our faces talking instead of just our voices, go to our YouTube channel. We will put a link in the show notes, because apparently searching Appodlachia on YouTube is making it very difficult to find us. So we'll put a link in the show notes. Please subscribe to us, give us a like and a listen on there. Would really appreciate it. And if you're feeling generous, we would love for y'all to be Patreon patrons. Patreon.com/Appodlachia. You can join for just $1 a month. It really helps us out. It helps us finance some of the costs of making this podcast even better, improving the quality. And if you join, which tier, John, you get a sticker?
$5 tier gets a sticker.
$5 tier. $5 tier, you get a sticker. They're pretty dope stickers, too. You can see them on our social media page. Really nice. Great design by Liz Pavlovich. So yeah, give that a look. We really appreciate it. Anyway, on to the episode today. We got a good one, John. We got a good one. Today we are talking to Steve Shell and Cam Collins, who are two of the main people of the enormously successful horror anthology podcast, Old Gods of Appalachia. It's a really, really great show. Really, if you're really into Appalachian history and you're also into even horror or just entertaining fictional podcasts, this is going to be a really good one for you. John, what were your thoughts on this interview?
It's one of those interviews that was like, how did we book that? Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. It's like, they're legit. What their, I guess, quote unquote product is pretty awesome. And I think it's a really, really solid interview.
We hope you all enjoy this interview with Steve and Cam. a lot of our listeners have pointed you all out on many occasions, and I started listening to you all a couple weeks ago, about midway through season 1, and I gotta say that I love your all stuff, and I'm just really excited to talk to you all about kind of how you came up with the idea of Gods of Appalachia and your backgrounds and all of that. So if you want, we can just jump right into it.
So I'll start because this was my baby to start with, and Cam and I are co-writers on this. We've known each other for 25 years. Literally, it's not an exaggeration. We are very old people, and we grew up in Wise County, Virginia, right there on the Kentucky border. Both went to J.J. Kelly High School, which no longer exists, and Clinch Valley College of the University of Virginia, which is now the University of Virginia's College at Wise. All the things we once loved are gone or have changed. And I had dabbled in podcasting off and on since iTunes made it a thing in like 2005. There was we're also both old punk rock hardcore kids as well. And there was a hardcore message board where people were posting about this thing called podcasting. So I made a couple of episodes of a radio show themed around that board where I played people's bands from there and made fun of this one guy who was super lame that everybody made fun of. And he was just a troll. And that was fun. We figured out how RSS worked, but then it wasn't a big thing. And then a bunch of years later, I do some medieval reenactment stuff. Shut up. It's not LARPing. It's not the same thing at all.
Hey, no hate if it is. I respect that.
But I do a podcast for them that's all based on the bardic and oral traditions of the Society for Creative Anachronism. So I was actively podcasting, and I was listening to stuff like Black Tapes, which I have strong feelings about how bad that became. And I'll say that out loud. I don't care. And great things like Life After and The Message and Steal the Stars, which Cam turned me on to, and Limetown. And I'm like, man, we could, because there were some horror podcasts that sounded great, like Limetown and The Message, but then like GE produced them, like GE Podcast Theater, like Nuclear Weapons GE had money behind them.
Yeah, right.
So I thought, well, my stuff sounds pretty all right. I wonder, so I started just kind of brainstorming what kind of scary stuff I could do. And I work for The Moth, if you guys are familiar with The Moth podcast.
Yeah. I'm
a host of Asheville is the smallest satellite city that has a Moth, an official Moth event. And I'm one of two hosts. The other host is Betsy Puckett, who, if you listen to our Patreon storyline, Build Mama a Coffin, is the most terrifying woman on the planet. If you listen to the commercial for the finale or the ad for the finale that's in the Patreon stream, she is the voice of Granny White, and she is terrifying. But anyway, so I was driving back and forth between Asheville, North Carolina, where I live, and Whitesburg, Kentucky, where I have a long and storied history with punk rock and that hippie little hillbilly town. And we were doing a Moth main stage show there, and they were doing Appalachian voices, and so they roped me in, and I'm their token Billy, I guess. So they, yeah, I mean, but it's good, it's fine. I tell a lot of stories about Appalachia and about growing up in the mountains, especially within like the Free Will Baptist Church, and not a contradiction in terms exactly, but anyway, so I was driving, and I hadn't driven through coal country in a while. We both have a complicated relationship with Appalachia, and going back, capital B, capital H, back home. I live in a town of 100,000 people, going back to a town of 2,000. Cam lives in Bristol. How many people are in Bristol?
We probably got around 50,000, I think.
Yeah, I mean, going back home is going, and Cam has no family there anymore. All her family's in Tennessee now. So I was driving through there, going up there, and I was driving on those switchback roads, cutting back and forth, and I forgot how when you go in coal country, you can go around a curb and it be completely dead and sapped out and just like a wasteland, and then two curves later it's lush and overgrown, and you're lucky there's not kudzu on the interstate, so I started like just brainstorming in my head, like man, what if we had like some sort of old school like mythology, like what if there were forces that were responsible for the desolation and then at the same time the rampant over nature of Appalachia. And I just started brainstorming, and the line came to my head, which if you listen to episode 0.5, which is the worst name numbering thing we've ever done, It was going to be episode 1/2, but there's no way to type 1/2 on a podcast episode. So episode 0.5 starts with, in these woods, there are 2 queens. So we set up this idea of there being a force of light and dark, life and death, which it's not exactly that. It didn't stick with that. Then I started brainstorming about, like, what's always kept Appalachia. Why are there no real, quote, I'm doing air quotes here, major cities in Appalachia? All the big cities, like in West Virginia, Tennessee, and Virginia, are hours away from what people would consider like the heart of Appalachia, like Southern Appalachia. Like what has kept us in and everything else out. And then just kind of, I just started brainstorming, like, well, what if there's something under the mountains? Well, what would that be? And then we started talking about falling back on our goth role playing background, playing White Wolf growing up in the 90s, talking about, the like changeling and fairies having the oldest magic in the world in the Appalachians, because these mountains used to be bigger and they used to be taller and they're all worn down. And I'm like, well, what would have worn them down? Why would they have been that big to start with? And I just got the idea that Appalachia has been the way it is because thousands of years ago, something dark and awful was buried underneath it, intending it to be its prison. And also tying in that old kind of fallacy, like faux mythology about Kentucky, that, the bloody land, which is a great motif and also totally historically inaccurate in some ways, or actually historically ambiguous or unclear. Just like, the idea that Central Appalachia is made up and is bordered almost entirely of natural boundaries. If you look at the shape of Kentucky and West Virginia and incorporate that back into Virginia, and where, the straight line boundaries don't start until you get down to the kind of the bureaucratically defined states,
Right.
And it's almost like, well, this was supposed to be a prison. No one was ever supposed to live here. That's why the cattywampus was here. That's why the Bigfoot, if you want to call it that, was here. That's why these woods, aren't welcoming. That's why these are dark. That's why all the roads and the rivers carve out hollers, and everybody, and no one was ever supposed to be here. This was meant to be a foreboding, a place, everyone is supposed to be an outsider to Appalachia. But then as weather and winds and everything wore the mountains down, those that sleep beneath, as we call them, started to dream and started to call to the souls of men saying, come find. You need land? They don't want you? Come here. You want money? Well, dig and find. And then from there, it just kind of turned into, after that, our jumping off point is, well, of course, jacktails are messed up because the root of them is in this. Of course, these stories about what horrible things white people did to indigenous folks are because, everything. And then you look at mining disasters, natural disasters, everything in Appalachia has such a shadowy bit to it in a lot of ways that you're a half a step sideways from it being supernatural to start.
I definitely agree with that. And I think what's been really interesting with listening to your show is just how much it reminds me of, it's probably going to sound weird, but it reminds me of growing up because I was in Boy Scouts a lot.
Me too.
And so one thing they teach. Oh, great. So yeah, I was an Eagle Scout, and actually,
we blows and out, buddy. We blows and out.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah. Well, I was sort of forced into it too, so there's a little bit of that. But I actually, some of the more interesting experiences I think that sort of relate to that actually were when we were camping out in Camp Daniel Boone near Asheville, where you live. But one of the things that they teach you is to really respect nature and respect the land around you, because it's kind of a greater force than humans themselves. And so I kind of get that undertone, and just sort of the campfire stories that we would tell are reminiscent of the stories that you tell on your show, especially because they have like this underlying historical and storytelling nature that is so emblematic of Appalachia. And I was kind of wondering how you come up with the ideas for your stories, because I mean, obviously some of it's rooted in Appalachian history, but I was really interested in your process with that.
Cam, jump in here with me, because we work together on a lot of things, and Cam is my like this when Cam is, what's really weird is Cam did not grow up religious, and I did. So, but Cam ended up writing the church story.
Yeah, it's and until recently, and Build Mama a Coffin, I've written a lot of the men. It's so bizarre.
Yeah, and I've written most of the women.
Yeah,
And
it's like
yeah,
why?
so that's, but like for us, I mean, we just oh gosh, how to go here without being totally weird. I don't all right, so I'm just gonna go weird. I don't consider myself psychic or clairvoyant or sensitive, and I know Cam doesn't really either. Though Cam is a witch. I'm not a witch. Cam's a witch. But we have both been sensitive to things in Appalachia for a long time, and the old ghosts and the old things there are not things we're afraid of or like or laughing at or whatever. So some of the ideas come from there. Like for me, I knew for a fact when we started writing the narratives about the places that place and time would be important. The Witch Queen cycle takes place through the settling of Appalachia and moves throughout history. Barlow starts in 1917, and Barlow starts in 1917 because that was the year of the worst coal mining disaster in the state of Kentucky. And that was in Clay, which weirdly was actually sort of outside of Appalachia, but or the plateau at least, but it still had repercussions throughout. And all the things that happened in the Barlow cycle, from the hiring of the men of color as scabs and treating them like not training them or giving them really any real safety gear, and letting them, actually moving them to town and not telling them they were scabs. Like they just showed up thinking they were guys who got jobs,
Right.
and they moved into a community that immediately wanted to kill them. And that was a plot line I toyed with writing, but I really wanted to. I'll be straight. I really wanted to work with a writer of color who had Appalachian, background. And that's our other thing too, by the way. If you guys know that, we try to work as exclusively with Appalachian artists or artists with blood ties to Appalachia as we can, which can be limiting because Appalachian creatives are many. Appalachian creatives who want to do what we're doing, a little less than many. Appalachian creatives of color with who are really interested in writing about dark gods living under mountains, thin on the ground. So like we try to be very conscientious of not telling stories. Like we're working with Veronica Limeberry, who you can see her listed on our site. She's a former student of mine who now has 90 times more education than I do. And now the UN consults with her on matters of indigenous food sovereignty.
That's incredible.
She's half Cherokee, and she is working with us to get some of those stories told right now. But it's also a process where I'm not trying to demand emotional labor from indigenous folks, because I don't know if I can cuss on here or swear on here, but stuff's hard. Shit's hard right now. Like it's hard for everybody. Indigenous folks right now, between food crisis and stuff, is really super real, and Veronica is kind of occupied with that. So we're trying to bring in writers and contributing researchers to work with, so that if we tell the story of a town that's an analog of Lynch, Kentucky, which is like a mostly black town of folks descended from company coal miners, just over the Kentucky-Virginia border up around Keokee. I've done a little exploratory reaching into that area. There's a big article on those folks. No one wants to write for a horror podcast. And we're not whining about that. Don't blame them. But it also means I'm not going to jump in and write a POV from a man of color coming to work in a Kentucky mining town either. That's one thing. We actually had talks with a production company about this becoming a TV show at some point, which that's way up the road if that happens. And one of the angles, they're like, well, are you open to expanding other storylines? And I'm like, yes, I would love to have this. I would love to tell, like, when they bring the black men into work in Barlow, Kentucky, I would love to have a point of view family storyline written by a black writer about this experience, because I can't, I don't feel like I can accurately write that story.
Yeah, I mean, and just going back to what you're talking about, the actual historical disaster, that was actually originally our idea was to write a series of stories that were just based on historic disasters in Appalachia, and obviously we ended up going in a very different direction with this once we got rolling, which, I mean, it tends to happen. Process wise, that's how we roll. It's very organic, and we start working on something and, oh, what about this? And, and just have different ideas that shoot off in whatever direction. Build Mama a Coffin was in no way intended to be 17 episodes. It just worked out that way.
And we hadn't really talked about Mama directly. For your listeners who don't know, if you want to join us on Patreon, patreon.com/Old Gods of Appalachia, if you pledge $10 or more a month and become a member of Not Bloodkin, but Almost, or Bloodkin, or the Covenant of the Black Breath, the 3 upper tiers, you get access to exclusive storylines and stuff. And we just finished last night. We dropped the finale of Build Mama a Coffin, which was meant to be a 6 or 7 episode epistolary series of letters being written back and forth between these family members trying to agree where to bury their witch of a mother, not realizing that they were all being manipulated by forces beyond their means of what's going to happen to her body, not realizing that she's up and walking around making sure nobody gets her bones. And the story became enormously more complicated than that, because in the interim of what was supposed to be February to March, February or March and April, before we were going to drop season 2, we started talking with 2 different with a production studio and a production company, and both of them were kind of trying to court us to hold off on season 2 so they could drop it and get the benefit of the bump. And one company wanted to re-release season 1 on a bigger platform and remaster it and all this stuff. So we were kind of holding our breath, waiting to see what would happen with these 2 production companies, but we couldn't come out, and we're not going to name them, but we couldn't come out and talk about them and say like, hey, we're trying to be rock stars. We kept saying like, we're working on partnerships. We're trying to go with like, they can go next level. It would be great. And then in the end, our Patreon ended up being so supportive during COVID and so supportive during this, that as of right now, we're not interested, or we're not working with either of those studios, because we've landed on our own feet and we still own our stuff. And we're going to produce season 2 and whatever beyond it on our own terms, because of the support we get from our family. And by family, I mean capital F family, the creepy cult fandom that has grown up around this show. And yeah, so like our writing process starts from, like Cam said, we were going to write, it was originally going to be the Clay, Kentucky disaster, then the Hurricane Valley, the hurricane disaster, we'll call it that, which was a cave-in that happened under 20 inches of snow at Christmas time. Which, not to say we won't revisit something like that at some point, but we will. There are elements of that ended up inside of Barlow. But when Barlow got split into 2 episodes, and we've said this before, Cam was kind of finding her way through a difficult time, and if she wants to talk about that, she can. I'm not going to put her on the spot. She kind of like left the process for a minute in the early stages, and I'd asked her if she wanted to write an episode, just jump in and do a guest episode. And I kind of had all my framework in place, and she came back, and I was like, hey, I don't know what there is for you to work on, because I've kind of got this narrative laid out. And she read the prologue, and she read the description of the town, and just says, give me the church. I'm like, what church are you talking about?
What are you talking about?
She's like, there's a church. You mentioned a church. I'm like, yeah, it's just set dressing. The town is made up of bank, a church, a dry goods store. And she's like, yeah, but somebody had to bury those bodies. And I'm like, oh, shit. You're right. And then I don't know where you are in the season. I don't want to spoil anything for you, but Pastor Cletus Garvin was born.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that story arc.
Thank you.
Yeah, and what's crazy is Cam was not raised in the Baptist church, so that you're hearing me feeding her information about the church, and us doing research on. We researched the crap out of that church name forever. Everybody thinks it's just a cheesy Lovecraft reference, but
no, it's not.
Church name construction in the 1800s and early 1900s were very specific. So the Tabernacle of the Elder Covenant very easily could have been. It sounds like Cthulhu as hell, but like it very easily could have been a little fire and brimstone brick and mortar in a tiny little mine in town. And it opens the door for a lot of things. But yeah, Cam crushed. I love that. I love the church story arc so much. And I felt really bad for her, because I have all these characters I can put on t-shirts on our Threadless stores, like the Witch Queen and the Walker Girls and some other folks. If you're not that far, you haven't met them yet. But I've got all the good guys, and Cam's like, well, I got this pastor who sold his family and his soul to the devil, sort of.
Like we're sitting there, and people start making fan art, and the first one, we were like, holy shit, somebody made fan art. We were like, we just completely freaked out. But
and we love people drawing the stag and the witch queen, but there are other things you can draw in the series.
yeah, I like we kept, getting all this stuff, and I'm like, nobody draws anything for mine. And then we got one, and it was so good. And I'm like,
Dude, I forget the artist. Forgive me, artist. We've retweeted on Twitter. Did like this bronzy oil painting of a scene from the finale, which I'm not going to talk about if you're not there yet. The scene from the finale of Cletus's arc, which is Homecoming, and it was this moment that like Kim had really just painstakingly laid out, and it's so freaking creepy. And when we saw that art, as soon as I saw it before she was up that morning, we're 2 hours apart. And I'm like, and I know she gets up early to take her partner to work and then goes back to sleep. So I'm like making sure I have screenshots of this like in her Facebook Messenger. I'm like, look what you got.
Yeah.
Someone finally drew something. No one's ever drawn Cletus though. Cletus is not in that picture because it's from his point of view.
Yeah, no, it's so great, and I was so happy. Just absolutely thrilled.
Well, that means that Chuck and I now have to challenge all of our listeners to draw fan art, which would be absolutely terrible on our part, only because of the way that we look individually. So that challenge is actually not real. Please don't do that, because it'll probably make me feel self-conscious. But so let's talk. We've talked a little bit about season 1 now. We've talked kind of about your all's background. We are always truthful with our listeners. Obviously, you're here to talk season 2, and why don't you let us know a little bit about season 2 and when can people look for it?
Okay, so we haven't announced our drop date yet, so we're going to talk around it. We have some things we can talk about. We haven't announced there's the theme. Season 1, of course, the theme was Barlow, Kentucky, 1917. Season 2, we can talk about a little bit. Number 1, there will be no interlude episodes in season 2. If you followed season 1, there are some shorter episodes that are labeled an interlude, which really weren't that different from whole episodes. The theme music was different. The soundscaping was different. And they tended to be a little shorter and usually might have had poetry in them. Originally, we had planned to go long episode every week, long episode of poetry or stream of consciousness stuff. Long episode, interlude, but this season 2 will be all full-length episodes.
The things that we intended to be interludes just kept turning into, nope, that's full episode. Well,
yep.
So
I've already done the artwork. I'm not changing it. But we won't reveal the title of the theme, but this season 2 will focus on death. And I know what you're thinking, Steve. You guys killed a bunch of people in season 1. But this is going to be a more intimate walk with death, and what death means in Appalachia to a family, and what death means in terms of the supernatural elements of our world, of our alternate Appalachia. And that's something we didn't talk about real quick. If your listeners aren't familiar, if you expect to go into Old Gods and find stories set in Wise County or Letcher County or any of the places we grew up, you won't find that. Our world has shifted and changed. You'll find Esau County, Virginia, and Jacob County, Kentucky. Isaac County, West Virginia will make an appearance in season 2. Baker's Gap, Tennessee is not a place, but if you look real hard and listen real hard, you can see where the railroads go. That's a setting for the Wolf Sisters, which is kind of the trilogy that came after season 1 and is leading into season 2. A big part of season 2 takes place in East Tennessee, and the railroads play a big part in season 2, where mining was the focus of season 1. The railroads and the mines are ever present with us. There'll always be some influence of the mines. But you can look for, I'll say this, you guys can look for, you're not far out from the drop of season 2. Pay attention to the signs in the month of August, family. Pay attention to the signs. They will point you the way. And also there'll be a live stream event where I'll be all cryptic and Crow Lord, and then I'll be like, oh, and by the way, just watch our YouTube channel, because we're going to do a stream. And I will say, we will drop a trailer for season 2. We actually have several teaser things. Like, if you've been watching our Facebook, our official Facebook page, the cover video has changed several times. A couple days ago, it was a walk through a 19th century graveyard in Kentucky, and now it's something even creepier that I also tweeted out on Twitter today. And we're going to be dropping these little viral moments. Viral is not the word I'm looking for. These little moments to kind of tease what's coming, and then we'll do a live stream event and drop the trailer. But it's not far out. It's literally weeks away, like single digit weeks away.
But y'all are masters of suspense over here with season 2, and the way that you tease it out was really interesting. And I'm wondering if there's any details you could give us, at least like what served as the inspiration for it, because A Family's Walk with Death sounds really interesting and really cryptic, but it also does sound very Appalachian in a certain way. And I'm just kind of curious what served as the inspiration, and how did you come up with the concept for season 2 without giving too much away, of course.
Yeah, we got to be careful here, Cam. It's a lot of the inspiration came from a song. Music, if you've been listening to, music is a big part of our heritage and our show. And a song very much sets the tone and the flavor. And it's a song we heard not through Appalachian tradition. It didn't get popular in our world through Appalachian tradition, though it is tied back to the South and back to the mountains through history. A big part of it came from not the prologue, but the Witch Queen episode, which from the beginning, my initial line is that in these woods there are 2 queens, and we have learned of the Witch Queen, whose powers are tied to the green, and the green being kind of our overall force of old bones and all the life force, and from a D&D perspective, druid magic, shamanistic magic, granny magic. Granny medicine, as Christian members of my family would like to say, because they didn't want to say witchcraft. So the other queen is the heart of season 2, and you will learn about her in the second episode of season 2. Season 1 or episode 1 is a prologue. Every season will have a prologue, which is sort of a sermon-y, very poetic-y, my style of writing. Thing that touches on what's going to happen that season. And then the second episode for these 2 seasons will be the introduction of the queens and how and kind of what they are. And then her, and just like the Witch Queen, her arc will have its own arc that carries through season 2, and it will also shade definitely shows up in other storylines.
Well, I won't ask you too many more questions about season 2, because I don't want to have to force you into trying to dance around some of the subject matter, and don't want you to spoil anything. But I'm kind of curious what your all's vision is, I think, for the future of Old Gods of Appalachia, because as you mentioned, there's a lot of Appalachian creatives, maybe not a lot in your space, but it seems like you're creating you're kind of carving out a niche for yourselves. And so I'm just kind of curious what you see the future as and what you hope to do with it.
I mean, I think we have said that we would like to see 5 or 6 seasons of the show. And we're going to jump like one. I know we've been teasing this since season 1, so I don't mind saying it. We want to do a season set in the late 70s, early 80s, at the height of the Satanic Panic. In rural Appalachia, because we both lived through that. I'm 45. Cam is 27 forever.
Forever and ever.
She's not 27. Yes. She's not close to 27. She's very old too. But yeah. So we both were. I graduated high school in 1993. So I was the devil worshiping D&D playing kid in our little town. So we know that part of Appalachia really well. But like, what happens when it's connected to real monsters and not in your stereotypical, we played a game and now it's real. Then we're not doing that at all.
Yeah.
But that may be season 3. And we bounce back and forth with the titles of The Secret Graveyard, which is a place Cam's high school principal accused her of knowing the way to.
Yeah. We were having secret ritual. We were having rituals in secret graveyards. Yes. It was great.
and my joke title is 2nd edition Devil Worshipper's Guide to Appalachia. It won't be that one. But yeah, so like we would like to see it go forward. And Deep Nerd Media, which is our production company that doesn't have a website for some reason, we've always just been saying it. We're going to produce it. We're going to produce. Yeah,
eventually it'll happen.
Yeah, we're going to be an LLC here real soon. We need to be.
Yes.
We have the copyright now, but we have other shows we want to do. I know there are going to be we have some other stuff in development, talking to some people that we would love to launch. And we would love to, help other Appalachian creators. But granted, I do plan on operating in a genre space. I mean, like horror, fantasy, that kind of stuff. And please don't start sending us demos, because we are not anywhere ready to do anything but our own shit right now. uh, but yeah, so I would like us to, I would like to see us go at least seasons 5, season 6. And I would not be opposed. I mean, we've been approached about television and film rights. We've had meetings and conversations and been flown to fancy places out west to talk about things. And I would love to see those things in their own time. And this is something really cool I can say. When we ended up with an agent really early on, which is weird. Family friend of my family is married to a guy who wrote like legitimate movies. Like he wrote maybe he wrote the first draft of Star Wars Rogue One. Maybe he wrote the Book of Eli. Go look up who that is. Great dude. His wife is my wife's best friend, one of her best friends that she's known online forever. So when people started sniffing around about RPG rights or TV rights, I'm like, I don't. And I reached out to that guy and I'm like, hey, do you have a minute? Can we talk? He's like, no, I'm actually very busy, but here, talk to my agent. I'm going to send him your podcast. And he sent his agent our podcast, not knowing his agent's favorite style of horror was exactly what we do. That creepy, eldritch, whatever.
Dang.
And so this guy who, this guy who represents some people who may or may or not be affiliated with Marvel movies, likes our stuff, and he was like, "Hey, let me be a friend of the show. Let me, if you get any deals, run them by me. If I have time, I'll look at them." We're like, "Oh, awesome!" So we stayed in touch with that person and with our agent, Charlie Ferraro. He's our agent. I can say that. Then we got flown out to the West Coast to talk to a couple of studios. And met Charlie in person for the first time, and he offered to officially represent us. And now we work with him in United Talent out of LA. And so we've had this agent who was helping broker some deals that we ended up walking away from. People kept offering us like, hey, you guys do a great podcast. Let's do a movie on Hulu. What? No, that's not what we wrote. No. Like, oh, can we publish your transcripts? Well, we could do a coffee table book. That would be cool, but I don't think we're really big enough for people to want to. We just want to make a podcast, and we kept saying,
we'd like some assistance with making the podcast.
We would like to do this full time for our jobs. Find me somebody who'll give me that money. Ha ha ha. And so they went and talked to us, a production company who we were very close with, but ended up not doing it because they were like, cool, we'll do this, and maybe we'll do some TV or film up the road. But then what happened was our Patreon and our Threadless and all the things that our family supports, buying merch from us, pledging money and subscribing, all of a sudden somebody was giving us the money to do this full time. And it was the
fans.
It was the people, it was the people we were making it for. The folks we did talk to, that a discussion was not on the table unless I had 100% content creative control. Nobody wrote on the show unless I said so, and nobody took anything out of the show unless I said so. That was pending to like common sense decency. Like I wasn't going to do like necrophiliac porn stories, like I wasn't going to do. I wasn't going to.
They're like, please don't get us sued or something.
Yeah,
or make porn. Please don't.
This week, O.J. Simpson comes to Appodlachia. That isn't going to happen. No, we're not going to like deal with living properties, like it's just not. It's so like, but yeah, so there's kind of common sense. So that was on the table, but it just came down to our fans. I guess I can say this: our fans made it more worth our while to stay indie and work with the money we're making on Patreon and try. Let me anybody who's listened to this, and we'll promote this too, but anybody who's thank you. Anybody who PayPal'd us money, who bought T-shirts, who pledge on Patreon, like Cam lost her job in COVID. We refer to our beloved friend Heather as Sister Heather out in Virginia Beach, who's a dear friend of mine, who like probably one of the best people in my life, who helps mail out our Patreon packages, manages our Patreon database, and that kind of stuff. She got fired from her work from home copywriting job that she had, and I put this out on the show and said, like, hey guys, times are hard. This is what's going on. We expected the Patreon to wither and wilt during COVID because we understood it has tripled. Like, I'm not we're creeping up on 1,600 patrons. Like, it's stupid. Like I'm waiting to wake up at any time. This it's ridiculous, but it's enabling us to do this and to give this our energy.
It's amazing.
I'm not teaching.
We're so grateful.
I've stepped away from teaching for the first time in 16 years to budget out and make this my full-time gig. And my goal is for Cam not to have to do anything either. Cam's a digital developer and does amazing web work. If you need any work, Camellia Digital, hook her up. But my goal is for her to be laughing on a giant treasure chest of Appalachian money. No, I'm just kidding. Our goal is to basically be full-time creative. Yeah, and I'm getting to do that.
We would both like to be full-time. Yeah.
That may be the first time somebody said Appalachian money.
It's true. I almost said a giant treasure chest full of coal, but that will just kill you.
Yeah.
We get into season 2. Oh, here's a little season 2 tidbit for you. I talked about it a little bit here and there. We started playing around with if we wanted to have coal be something like some magical substance or have something to it. When we very first started brainstorming, we looked at one of the things we looked at were maps of coal fields, where the coal falls in Appalachia. And I challenge. I pull up your Google right now and Google map of Appalachian coal fields, and tell me that doesn't look like the shadow of something. Like if you were to ultrasound the Earth and you saw this hulking form tapering down across. We started talking about what coal is. The fact that it's compressed carbon. That it's literally life that has been compressed and squeezed under the earth until it is flammable, and it is something that can be burned for light and heat. It is also dead organic material. So it is life, it is death, it is light, it is heat, but it produces, and you use it to burn for light to push the darkness away, but it generates smoke and pollution that draws the darkness ever closer. That's what coal is. It's like time compressed into a physical thing you can touch. And it will kill you because that's what time does. So that's going to be a meditation and some stuff that comes out in season 2 and throughout the course of this of the series. And I always joke about, my dad was a diesel mechanic. He didn't work in the mines. He worked on top of them and on the strip jobs.
I want to thank you guys for coming on. It's been a huge pleasure and a really big honor to have you guys on. Where can, because some of our listeners may not have heard your stuff before, maybe have dabbled in it, where can people find more information about you? Where can they look?
www.oldgodsofappalachia.com, just spelled just like it sounds. You can find the show on every podcast platform: Spotify, Google, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts,
all of them,
SoundCloud. If it's a place that has podcasts. We're not on Pandora. Someone asked us if we were on Pandora, and I fought them. I don't know why. It just felt like a thing to do. It felt insulting, I guess. But Spotify is where a lot of people find us. It's super easy there. The website, if you want to back us on Patreon, if you love it and you find it, patreon.com/Old Gods of Appalachia. If you want to see our dope merchandise, a lot of which is fan art. I'm a graphic designer, so is Cam. But our best shirts are designed by people who drew them for the community, and we paid them good hard Appalachian money for them. We believe in paying fan artists. So people got really squeaked out when they saw our thread list. They're like, there looks like there's a lot of art theft because everything's in different styles. I'm like, nope, look at the description. There's a tag to the author, and you can ask them. They have been paid real money for their artwork, and that's at oldgodsofappalachia.threadless.com. But you can find us anywhere and everywhere.
Facebook, Twitter.
But thank you all for having us. I really appreciate it. Oh yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. So we do this thing on the show. Complete your social media ritual. Facebook.com. We have a group called the Fellowship Hall, and that's a fan group where people post music and art and talk about the show. There's a Discord server that's linked off of the website. We're on Twitter at Old Gods Pod, Instagram at Old Gods of Appalachia. Yeah, we're out there. You can find us. We're incessant, and we are inevitable.
Yeah, and all of it's linked on our website too, so we're easy to find.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for coming on the show and sharing your stories with us.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, really.
was our interview with old Gods of Appalachia. What a good one. Definitely a subject matter that you probably haven't heard on this show before, but involves some really, really creative people from Appalachia, and Steve and Cam and all the rest of the people that work on their show. Give it a listen, for real. It is really good. It's really spooky and scary and awesome. John, what did you think?
First off, super scary. My wife can vouch for this. I hate scary stuff, but I listen to their podcast. It's so good that I don't get freaked out. You know what I mean? Like I want to know what happens next, which is crazy for me because usually if there's something remotely close to scary, I'm out of there. So yeah, I mean, that says a lot for them. Plus, I mean, look, I'm just going to say it, Chuck. I think I could voice a character on there. I'm just saying. I think I could. Now, I mean, they would really have to be desperate. That's all they would have to be desperate. But I am willing to step in.
You heard it here first.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, let me be the understudy's understudy.
Yeah, I love listening to it, and I think what's really interesting is just how they've woven in these Appalachian undertones into these really creative horror stories, and so it's just, I don't know, it's something so unique but so interesting, and it's no wonder that they've had so much success. On to the last part of our show, and before we get to it, I realize we have not done a proper introduction to this in a long time. We started this segment, and I think we've had it in almost every single episode, and we explained it at the beginning of our show, but I know that we picked up so many new listeners since then, so I wanted to give a little bit of context. And so we have a segment at the end of every show called Beef with Big John. Big John being my counterpart to this show. He's big, and he tends to like red meat and like putting it on a grill until it gets cooked and then eat it. Beef is a passion of John, but debate and strong opinions are also a passion of John, so we decided to meld the two into this wonderful concoction of a segment in our episodes. And so every week, John details a different beef each week, something that bugs him, that grinds his gears, and something that deserves to be highlighted in Appalachia that maybe it's getting enough attention, maybe it's not, but he's here to litigate the truth. And so, without further ado, we present to you Beef with Big John.
Ladies and gentlemen, live from Parkersburg, West by God, Virginia, it's the 18 Husky himself, Beef with Big John.
Chuck, I'm not gonna lie, I had trouble picking this week's beef, but I think I got it right. But the honorable mention is on our Twitter. If anybody doesn't follow, or if you follow it, you've probably seen it, and it's a ridiculous shirt that cost way too much money. Go to our Twitter, check it out. You're gonna be just as pissed as we are. But that being said, this one definitely won up that, Chuck. We're headed back to your home away from home. Tennessee,
the only 10 I see. Governor Bill Lee, plumber turned chief executive of the great state of Tennessee.
Also, first off, I want to start out. Bill Lee sounds like Billy. That's all I'm saying. It's just so
Billy.
It's just so weird. So I'm going to call him Billy from now on. So Governor Billy decided that he was going to sign a bill into law, Chuck. This bill is such... I'm trying not to cuss as much, so is such crap. It is such crap, Chuck. And here's why. No, I'm just kidding. It's total horse shit. Tennessee Governor Billy decided he was going to sign a bill into law, and this bill, Chuck, in my opinion, violates constitutional rights because it ramps up punishments for certain kinds of protests. And the punishment, Chuck, includes losing the right to vote.
Wow.
this is
sounds pretty
yeah,
un-American
this
to
is
me.
Insane. Right, and for a guy who touts that he's like the American, you'd think he wouldn't be for it, but he signed it into law. And in fact, this was this went over 2 months of debate in the assembly. There was back and forth between both sides. I think there were a couple Republicans who flipped on it, but in a special 3-day session, it was approved and signed, and there was actually not even an announcement in the earlier weeks. No one talked about this. Even the same week, no one talked about it. It just went into law without much mention, and then the after fact came in. But I want to really focus on what is ramped up here. First off, we've just mentioned the losing the right to vote. The second thing is that you can have a mandatory 45-day sentence, Chuck, for what they consider aggravated rioting, and it boosts boosting the fine for blocking highway access to emergency vehicles, and it enhances the punishment for aggravated assault against a first responder to what in Tennessee is classified as a Class C felony.
Yeah, and it's important to add the context to this that protesters have been essentially camping out on Legislative Plaza, which is right in front of the Tennessee State Capitol, I think essentially ever since the murder of George Floyd. So that's been several weeks, several months, in fact.
Right.
And so this kind of, I guess, led to a couple of state lawmakers getting an old bee in their bonnet because, God forbid, people protest in public property.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, Chuck, because the highlight of this bill, what I want, really the filet mignon, it's what I wanted you to really, I wanted you to feature it last. You know, I wanted you to take it in. We've had all this other beef, but here is the Wagyu. Japanese Wagyu, American Wagyu, it's not good. Anyway, the new law stipulates that people who illegally camp on state property. First off, I'm not really sure how you can illegally camp on a property that you pay taxes on, but anyway.
Great question. Don't know either. Where's the answer?
Yeah. Face a Class E felony, which I don't know much about Tennessee law, but luckily I do know how to read. This means that it is punishable, Chuck, for up to 6 years in prison.
That is insane.
6 years.
What do you have to do to get 6 years in prison in other places? Like rob a bank? Literally like armed robbery?
Yeah, I mean, there are literally people who possess child pornography that get less of a sentence than this.
It's such an un-American thing to do. One of the most fundamental rights we have is voting, and so many times you see politicians chipping away at that right in so many different ways, and this is just one of them. And Tennessee already has really, really strict voting laws on the books. They've got voter ID, they purge voters quite often, and their voter participation rate or turnout rate is one of the lowest in the entire country. And it's because of stuff like this.
Yeah, and I mean, Bill Lee often talks about sentence reform. That's one of his talking points when it comes to different types of laws. But this isn't on point with that. I mean, it's actually against that. It's making a sentence that's way more critical and way longer than it ever should be. And that's exactly what he claims to be trying to defeat in Tennessee, which is obviously not the truth. The way that they back this up, the way that they make this law look good on its face, I guess you would say, is that they point back to fires that happened inside and outside the Capitol in May, which obviously fires are dangerous. I don't know what to say with that. I mean, it probably does give them some justification. But the fact is, you can't just steal someone's right to protest. That point blank. And that's what they're doing. That's literally what they're doing. They're saying if you come on state property, which essentially the public owns anyway, we're going to imprison you for 6 years.
Yeah. The right to protest your government is one of the most important and another one of the most fundamental rights. And you do make a great point. Not only does this rob you of the right to vote, but it also discourages you and essentially prevents you from petitioning and protesting your government. So that's the thing, too. The other point you brought up about Bill Lee, which is that criminal justice reform and sentencing reform were two very big things he ran on, and that in his personal life he was involved in. And so that's why it's particularly striking to see him embrace something so asinine and so blatantly unconstitutional as this.
It's crazy, too, because I personally think that laws like this will be your next quote-unquote war on drugs, where they over-punish people for little things. I think that this type of law has those ramifications where we look back and we're ashamed. It's like when people get caught with a joint in the 1970s, 1980s, and 1990s, and then they go to prison for 30 years. Which really does happen. I mean, if you look at the Clemency Project, they'll show you this could be the next focus of the Clemency Project if more states continue to go down this road. Bill Lee is being so hypocritical here in terms of what he ran on versus now what he stands for. And it's sad because this is going to create so many new court cases of things that people don't want to litigate because it's a bullshit law. And I find it to be almost poetic that a former plumber is clogging the system.
I knew you were going to fit in a plumber joke somehow. I knew it. What better time than now,
Billy.
though? It is sad to see from my previous state that I lived in and loved. And I just do better. And this will not be the last time we talk about this. In fact, later this week, we're going to be having Senate Minority Leader Jeff Yarbrough of the Tennessee State Senate come on and talk about this bill and why he's opposed to it and all of that. So we'll look forward to a conversation with him, and we'll stay on this because this is ridiculous. Anyway, that's the show. Thank you so much for listening. Please make sure you tell all your friends, like, subscribe, social media, all that. Get on that YouTube and that Patreon. We'd love your support. And we'll see you next week. We got a lot more stuff, really good stuff coming up in the future I think you all will be excited about. So we'll see you next week on Appodlachia.